Hello everyone! This is Nathan P. Butler, this is my YouTube channel, and this is our project update for the month of March 2018. I always try to do one of these at the end of the month so that we can sort of look at where things stand for the various projects that I'm involved with. And we've got quite a few new releases to talk about, got some upcoming things to talk about, and something that will probably be seen as bad news or perhaps at least an end of an era, which I'll elaborate more on in another video, but we'll at least touch on it here. Of course, for those of you who are following my Patreon, this is that video where if you are following the Patreon, if you are a supporter from the lowest tier on up to the highest, then you get a chance to see your name listed in the thanks at the end of the video, along with eventually in a special Patreon thanks page for the next edition of Esada on Home Video, which is going to be around probably 2020 at this point. At least that's the projection ahead. But right now, we got still kind of a small enough group of people for Patreon that I did want to call those folks out with the thanks by name here on the show, not just in the credits, but here at the outset. So first, let me thank our travelers through the Butlerniverse, who include Thomas Myers, Mitch Godfrey, Martin Dahl, Austin Pierce, Jeremiah Mustard, and S.W. Chris. Among our denizens of the Butlerniverse, we have Jared Rasher, Joey Zitzman, Stephen M., Sam Howard, Chris Morgan, Robert Medina, Bobby Craig, and Jason Hunt. And finally, for our nobility of the Butlerniverse, and hey, nobility, just keep in mind, if you're trying to put in questions for the Q&A for this month, make sure you get them in here in the next couple of days. I will be recording early in April, but not on the 1st of April, which is usually around the time I do it because of some travel that's going on. But expect it during that first week of April. So you got a little time to get your questions in if you still want to. Anyway, our nobility of the Butlerniverse are Brian Snook, David Ray, Gary Sherwood, Jonathan Pickens, Benjamin Handelman, Chris Locke, Andrew Bettis, and Aaron Melzak. So thank you all for your support on Patreon. For those who haven't seen it yet, it is patreon.com/NathanPButler. Now, speaking of the Patreon, we have had new Patreon-exclusive content released since the last of these update episodes here. So, first off, for those who are the nobility, our 5th, I believe it is, Q&A video, our exclusive Q&A that we do on a monthly basis, went up earlier in March. And for those who are in the denizens or nobility tiers, we had 2 new audio commentaries get released in March. We had an audio commentary for Duel of the Droids, which is the second part of the Downfall of the Droid, Duel of the Droids, duology of episodes from the Clone Wars, and the first episode of a 3-episode arc, the Clone Wars Bombad Jedi. Yes, Jar Jar in the Clone Wars. Now, the first thing I want to mention outside of Patreon is the big thing happening sort of behind the scenes here, and it is something that I put up a video since the last update about to kind of announce it to everybody so that those who were curious would know, and that is that we're having a baby. Finally, after years of medical issues that has sort of made the question of whether we would ever be able to have a child kind of something that was up in the air for a long time, my wife is now in her 2nd trimester. We are expecting the birth of our first child at the beginning of September. Right now, we're thinking it's a boy because there was an early ultrasound where supposedly the baby flashed us, and the person reading was like, so would you like to know this early? So it looks like a boy. If so, Cade. If not, Leia. So names picked out. We're getting everything decked out in the room that we set aside as a nursery when we bought the house. Although we're still already running out of room. I don't know how that happened. But everything's kind of going smooth sailing so far. Just a lot of morning sickness and me being as supportive as I possibly can. But that is all happening here behind the scenes, and we'll see how that affects other projects as we go along throughout this video and otherwise. Mainly, it's the timeline that we'll talk about, and we'll hold that one for the end because that's going to kick off a separate video. Speaking of podcasts going on here in the last month, we had 2 new episodes of Star Wars Beyond the Films get released over at StarWarsReport.com. We wrapped up our year in review on February 25th with episode number 232, which is the films, the television series, and basically all the other stuff that just didn't fit within the other 3 episodes of year in review stuff for 2017. And then we did just release, actually today, as I'm recording this, March 27th, Mark put up our file for our next Q&A or a listener feedback episode, looking at things like feedback to The Last Jedi and other topics relating to the show. You can find both of those episodes over at StarWarsReport.com or subscribe through iTunes or wherever you happen to prefer. Also, since our last episode on Cloud City Casino, We had Cloud City Casino episode number 80 get released, where we talk about some Battlefront 2 news updates as of the time of release. We talk about Legion right before its official launch, and some of the misconceptions that I had in particular about it, and some of the concerns that some of the members of the community had about it, and more. In that episode, again, Cloud City Casino is right alongside Star Wars Beyond the Films at StarWarsReport.com. As for my book, A Saga on Home Video, A Fan's Guide to U.S. Star Wars Home Video Releases, which was released back in May, and I'm sort of looking ahead to a new edition in around 2020 at this point, because let's face it, Star Wars Home Video never sleeps. As we learn today, right, March 27th, happy The Last Jedi on Home Video Day, America. More on that to come. As I look ahead to another edition, and the idea of what's going to be added and how could I beef it up at that point, it's already a pretty meaty book. I mean, we're talking about 300 pages. It's pretty freaking in-depth. I put out sort of a feeler, a questionnaire, so to speak, on the Star Wars Home Video group on Facebook, run by Justin Berger, where he actually just recently honored me with giving the opportunity to assist him in moderating that group and posting content and such for that group. But I put out a feeler. I was like, even if it upped the price because of the quality of paper and the fact that it would be in color, do you think I should do the next one in full color? Because part of the issue with the first one was I didn't know if there would be much of an audience out there for it. And part of the thing that you learn as an economics teacher, of course, is that supply and demand is a very fickle thing when it comes to the impact of price. And I wasn't quite sure how elastic, so to speak, in econ terms, it would actually be. So I kept it grayscale to keep it affordable. And the thought process basically that they had was that, you know what, this is kind of a niche market anyway, but somebody who's already going to spend the money to buy a book on Star Wars Home Video, who cares about it enough that they're going to buy a book on it, they're probably willing to pay a little bit more to get it in full color. That would not be an issue. So the plan is that for the edition in 2020 or so, that it will likely be a full color print book and be quite a bit expanded. My guess is by that time we're probably looking at another 100 pages maybe or so. No idea. It really just kind of depends on how things pan out on the home video scene. But I'm already taking some strides toward that. Oh, if I could scoot back here and stand up. I picked up, and now I'm literally picking up, this, which probably, you know, it's like, wow, is that a suitcase? Are you going somewhere? What the heck is that? What that is basically a photo box, okay? So what that does is it's like a traveling photo studio kind of thing. You pull it open, and it gives you a nice, big, white, canvas-walled, evenly lit photo box to take pictures in with a minimum of glare and nice, even lighting. Another part of the thing that caused me to say, you know what, grayscale is the way to go is because the lighting in the room where I was able to take pictures for the first edition of the book wasn't all that great. And in grayscale, they look fine. In color, it felt a little yellowy because of the lighting. But this will allow me to take nice quality color pictures for that future edition. And I may even start taking the pictures soon so that eventually when I do get to working on a new edition, it doesn't all come crashing down on top of me in terms of workload. But that is sort of where things stand as far as a new edition goes. Again, don't expect one until we're at least done with The Last Jedi and Solo, and I would assume Episode 9 on home video before we ever get to that point again. I don't want to get into the Lucasfilm habit of double and triple dipping in a single year or in 2 back-to-back years and things like that. I think that, you know, we can leave that to the professionals, right? Or we can leave that to the people who are the license holders. Those of us out there creating educational resources, we can be a little bit more sedate with our blasts of releases. Speaking of being somewhat subdued and sedate with new releases and going in the total opposite direction, because I tend to be very prolific with YouTube releases, let's check out YouTube releases in the last month or so. And keep in mind when I say last month or so, the last update video was a little early. It was February 20th, so it's more like about the last month and a week or so at this point. So, the first thing that was added after the last update was I got to work again on my Nate's Favorite Deck Building Games series and put out some new material, episodes 4 and 5 of the coverage of Legendary Marvel. I actually have all the coverage now recorded all the way up through the current stuff in Marvel Legendary. I just haven't had time to edit it yet. So we had another couple episodes come out, episodes 4 and then 5, but a lot of the stuff is just sitting there waiting to be edited sometime in the near future. Other things have taken precedence. Then, on February 25th, we saw a review for the Star Wars role-playing game's Dawn of Rebellion sourcebook that works for all 3 of the game types. And then, same day, February 25th, a look at the newest of the Star Wars LCG, that's living card game, Force Packs, the newest of their, their little expansions from the Alliances cycle, which is Trust in the Force. From a live stream standpoint, did some more PlayStation VR Let's Plays for Apex Construct and for Moss. Moss is really surprisingly pretty awesome in VR. And then I also did a live stream of the PlayStation VR game Bravo Team, which was the exact opposite. It's pretty crappy. It's kind of garbage. Also, went back into a little bit of live streaming for Star Wars Battlefront, because of course they just instituted their new progression system that completely changes the way that basically everything but the actual shooting gameplay of the game actually works. So I did a live stream that wound up being 2 parts because it got cut off, but a live stream on March 20th, there was episodes 87 and 88, looking at the last day of the original progression system, and then did another stream on March 21st, which was to highlight the first day of Stage 1 of their implementation of a new progression system. It's going to be sort of slowly rolled out until we eventually sort of have the whole picture by the end of April, from what I understand. For Imperial Assault, I had a quick review of the Imperial Assault Nalhutta Swamps skirmish map, and a bunch of videos for Star Wars Legion, right? So, Star Wars Legion is stuff like, these guys here. Things that won't fit into the tackle boxes that I usually use to hold everything. We took a look at the initial contents of the starter box, looked at all the miniatures from the starter box once they were assembled, looked at the contents of all of the expansions up to this point that are part of this big first wave, and then did a quick size comparison between Imperial Assault and Legion, because that tends to be one of the most asked questions about that game. And then, of course, we had new episodes of what's kind of the flagship series of the channel now, which is from the Star Wars Home Video Library. We had episode number 21.7, which looked at the CBS Fox VHS version of that constantly seen double feature of Making of Star Wars and SPFX The Empire Strikes Back, which I'm kind of sick of looking at this point. We had, that was episode 21.7. Episode 145 brought us the Nova Media Nova Choice The Force Awakens releases from South Korea, the first South Korean releases shown on the show. I do have another one to show in an upcoming episode. It's just not recorded yet. We have episode number 146, which looked at the time that Troops, the fan film, was officially released on DVD. That was legally okay out there from Total Movie Magazine. We had episode number 147, which looked at the fan-made documentary The Force Among Us, and actually tied into an item that was used in my wedding, so interesting story there. And I did a quick update for intermission number 7.1 to update on new information we had just learned at that point about the Last Jedi home video releases for the US, which will be the highlight of an upcoming episode, hopefully actually tonight, of From the Star Wars Home Video Library. I say that, maybe this comes out after I even put that episode out. I'm basically just waiting on the Disney Store package to come that has the last piece of the puzzle to show you guys all the US ones in an episode. So hopefully it's out by the time this is out or right afterwards, but had an update on just some of the information about what was coming with the releases in episode 7, or excuse me, intermission 7.1. Then we had episode number 148, which looked at the Emmy screener for the Clone Wars episode Lethal Trackdown. Episode number 149 looked at the Emmy screener for the documentary The Legacy Revealed, and briefly sort of circled back to look at the fan site review copy of that. Episode number 150 looked at the VCD version of The Phantom Menace from Hong Kong as opposed to Malaysia. Episode number 151 looked at the Only at Blue Fans, or OAB, exclusive version of The Force Awakens from China. 152 looked at the Freemaker Adventures, the complete Season 2. And then, not really as an episode of From the Star Wars Home Video Library, but just kind of a quick heads up, when I did get my Disney Movie Club copies of The Last Jedi in the mail, I did a very quick video just to say, hey folks, just to let you know, it turns out that the one for Disney Movie Club, if it's the multi-screen edition, is actually different than the one that's the regular one out there in stores or even at Disney Store, in case folks were looking for a rarely recognized or rarely acknowledged variant that exists out there. So lots and lots of stuff on the YouTube channel here in the last month or so. And then lastly, we have the project that sort of started my dive into internet fandom projects, which is the Star Wars Timeline Gold, which is now heading towards a 21st anniversary this October. It's been around 20 years of my life already. Just a couple of years ago, it had passed the point where it was half of my life working on the project. And at this point, I've had a chance to work a little bit more on it since the last update. At this point, all the Legend of Luke Skywalker stuff is in there, but now so is all the stuff from the Canto Bight anthology, or the Canto Bight set of novellas, whatever you want to call it. A couple more comics, but not a whole lot else within just the last month. The focus has been, in many ways, elsewhere over the last month or so. But, and this is going to be the subject of a separate video, so I'm not really going to explain much of the whys and wherefores of it here. Wherefores, for those who are wondering, wherefore means why. Like, wherefore doesn't mean where. Wherefore means why. Learn your Shakespeare, right? The Star Wars Timeline Gold is something that I've really enjoyed working on and has been sort of a pet project of mine since 1997. It has grown way beyond anything I ever imagined it would be. I mean, it's over 3,000 pages at this point. I never would have expected it to be able to sort of open the doors for me to be able to write for Star Wars, about Star Wars, to sort of establish that kind of credibility out there and all of that. I never expected it to get to where it is now. That said, for various reasons, including the simple fact that I'm not going to have a whole lot of time, I'm going to have to be very judicious with my time once we have a baby running around here. For various reasons that I'll illustrate, or that I'll go into in a different video, the Star Wars Timeline Gold's 2018 edition, which is likely to be coming out in either late July or early August, more than likely, end of summer, but before the baby is due. That will be the last edition ever of the Star Wars Timeline Gold, or the Star Wars Timeline Project, as it was known at first. It's been an amazing run. It's taken me places I never imagined, and it's been this huge part of my life. But at this point, there are things that have caused me to question whether I even want to do it anymore anyway. And the recognition of how much my time is going to be so much smaller in terms of free time once the baby is here has finally led me to say, you know what, I think I'm done. I think it has to be done. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on the way you look at it, I kind of go back and forth on it, I don't really know of anyone that I know well enough, whose judgment I trust in chronology matters well enough, and who I think would have the wherewithal and the time to be able to pick it up from here and sort of become the new steward of the Star Wars Timeline Gold. So rather than leaving it kind of nebulous in that sense, it is just going to end. The next edition will be labeled the final edition, and anything that's not on there at that point just will never be on there. It will be, unique in that it'll have 2 new movies on it, right? The Last Jedi and Solo will both be on it, but it will not ever have Episode 9. It will not finish out the sequel trilogy. The Star Wars Timeline Gold's last edition will come before its 21st anniversary. So, just want to mention that. It is something that has been decided now, but I'll go into the specifics of it because I will probably wind up getting a little salty in the process. A little bit about why that's the case will come in another video that'll be uploaded onto the channel, probably as an episode of the vlog, more than likely, just so I have a place to kind of fit it in with other stuff. Or maybe it'll be project update and there'll be a parenthesis or something that says what it is. I haven't quite decided yet, but I feel like it's necessary to actually explain why, and I certainly will. Just not in this video because these things tend to be long enough as they are. So, with that said, I think that pretty much wraps up all the content updates for what's going on. Since February 20th, when we had the last one of these, coming up, of course, you'll have things like, from the Star Wars Home Video Library, episodes about The Last Jedi from the US, eventually from the UK, at least one item coming from Japan. We'll have more stuff that I actually have sitting on the shelves ready to have episodes recorded about that I just haven't had time to do. More of those episodes that are already recorded but not edited for Nate's favorite deck building games about Marvel Legendary will be coming out. And pretty soon, Michael and I and Mark and I will be getting together to record new episodes for each of the podcasts and such. And slowly but surely, work will continue on that 2018 edition, that final edition of the Star Wars Timeline Gold. All the while, I'm looking even further ahead and maybe starting to take some of those pictures for a second edition, 2020-ish, of a Saga on home video. So the work continues, the fandom continues, and yeah, I will see you in a month. Again, thank you for your support. If you want to support me on Patreon, it is patreon.com/NathanPButler, as I've mentioned before, or subscribe, like, whatever. I don't tend to ask for those, but people keep telling me I should, so there you go. But may the Force be with you, and I'll see you in April.